Good evening, everybody. This is going to be the second of the live videos that I'm using to explain to people what magic change is all about. I think before I start I should just maybe explain that I was talking about the fact that the first child that I was helping was within the Stagecoach setting. So at that time I was the principal of some Stagecoach theatre arts schools in Darlington and Yarm, and many of the children that I've helped since were also within that setting. I think that's quite significant in that Stagecoach has always said that it helps children's confidence, and it does enormously, just by the very nature of the type of classes that we teach, but also the fact that we had a very family feel and we were a very supportive community. So that within itself was important, but because confidence building was at the essence of what Stagecoach says it does, of course many parents would then send their children to Stagecoach if their children were not confident. So I suppose I therefore had available to me lots of children who were struggling quite often with anxiety or with a lack of confidence. So what I was particularly impressed with is how Magical Change managed to help those children where they were struggling with a lack of confidence or anxious thoughts and behaviours. So now I've established what the groundwork or the ground level of where I was working was, I want to take you back now to where I finished on my first video of a few days ago. If you haven't seen that video, please go back down the Magical Change Facebook page, because maybe what I'm saying to you now won't make sense if you haven't seen that. So at the end of that first day, I'll just recap a little bit. Dad of the very anxious 9-year-old girl had come to tell me on the Saturday that she had stopped doing all these anxious behaviours that the family had been witnessing. And I shared with you at that time how I felt about that, how really shocked I was and kind of mesmerised by it. And it started me off on a journey of wanting to find out why it had worked, which parts of it had worked, would it work for other children, what was at the basis of it. So on that day I went along to the break time and I went to speak to the little girl in person who was there. And I sat with her at the break time and I said, "I'm just amazed at how well you've done, darling. I'm very proud of you, and can you just tell me how you're feeling now, because that might help somebody else who's feeling in a similar way in the future." And I will remember this moment until the day I die. She just looked away from me for a couple of seconds and then looked straight back. It felt like looking into my soul, and said, "I don't think I'll ever be afraid of anything else again in all my life." And I was just speechless, as you might imagine. So that, more than anything else, made me determined I was going to do something about this, because it just was totally baffling and wonderful to me. So I was basically talking to anybody on that day who would listen. And I was saying, just listen to what's happened about this, and what do you think has made that impression on that child? And I was very fortunate in that 2 people I spoke to that day were very influential in how things went in the future. So the first lady I spoke to had been a parent for about 10 years. I didn't know what she did for a living. But after I'd told her, she said, "Well, actually, I'm an educational psychologist," which was a gift from above. So I said, "Oh, good. So if you come with me, can I just tell you what that conversation was like? And can you let me know what you think was influential in that?" So she came along and she listened, and at the end of it she said, well, on the face of it, it's very straightforward, it's fairly simple. She said, but actually there's quite a lot of fairly complicated strands that must be just coming together in such a way that A, child understands it, and B, feels that it's doable. So she said, you should tell the university about it. And I went, tell the university what? She said, well, there might be somebody who's doing some related research and they might be interested. Now, I probably wouldn't have done that, except that at the time my daughter was a student at Teesside University and she was in the psychology department. So to cut a long story short, I contacted the psychology department and they allocated one of their key lecturers to me with a specialism for children, and they were very, very encouraging of me into researching further what might be going on there. So the second person I spoke to on that day, I explained to her what had happened, and she said, that's amazing, Trudy, well done. And I said to her, it's a pity we don't have a magic card for your boy. And as soon as the words were out of my mouth, I thought, that would be really interesting. Because just to put you in the picture, her little boy had been with us for a while. He'd had a lot of trouble at school with poor behaviour. The family had been in and out of school on a number of occasions. He'd been at Stagecoach for a while. He loved to come. It was his kind of thing. He was a bit lively, but he was fine with us. So as soon as the words were out of my mouth, I thought, now this really would be interesting, because this is not anxiety that he's demonstrating. This is poor behaviour. He's not showing that poor behaviour to me. And if it made a difference for him, that would be really, really interesting. So I explained to the lady what was involved, and I said, would you like to try? She said, well, yeah, we'll try anything. So myself and the little boy and his mum went along, and we had a very similar conversation to the one that I'd had with the 9-year-old girl a week or two previously. Now, at the time, I didn't think that he was paying much attention to me, so he was sitting on his seat, swinging his legs around and gazing at the ceiling. And we finished the conversation, and I got to the point where I said, so, do you want to take this challenge with me? And he said, yeah. And I thought, I don't like the sound of the commitment in that. So I said to him, okay, so if you want to take this challenge with me, we have to shake hands on it, because that's what adults do. So he thought about it for a second, and he said, okay. So we shook hands on it, and he left, and I was really interested to see what would happen. Well, on paper, events were not good. So Mum hadn't spoken to Dad about the conversation, and Dad brought him to Stagecoach the next week. Dad didn't know he needed to see me. Somebody'd collared me about buying a pair of shoes, and by the time I turned round to speak to him, Dad and child had gone home. The following week, on a very, very rare occasion, I actually had a sickness bug and was off myself. So this meant now the child had been to school for 3 weeks. There'd been no positive reinforcement across 2 weekends. So in my mind, as a teacher, I think we're going to have to start all over again. So I'm walking down the corridor to meet the child at the end of his class, and his mum's just ahead of me. And I said, just before we see your son, can you just tell me what he's been like this week? And she just stopped dead on the corridor and looked at me and said nothing. And this completely unnerved me. And I said, what? She said, I can't describe what he's been like. He's like an entirely different child. And I'm still thinking the worst, thinking, oh my God, his behaviour's going to have deteriorated at school. What's happened now? And I said, why, what's happened? And she had another child with her, and she said, tell Trudy what he's been like. So this boy said, well, he's been a lot better. I said, what, at school? He said, yeah. And I was really emotional about that. I thought, poor little devil, he's done all of that by himself, and he's kept going for 3 weeks with no intercession from anybody, and I was super impressed. So when I went to see him, I said, okay, so how many stickers are we talking about this week then? So he said, it's definitely 3. So I said, right, so explain to me why it's 3. He said, because I've been trying all the time. And I said, I know you have, sweetheart, and I'm very proud of you. That's amazing. I said, you know, when I was talking to you the first time, I didn't really think you were listening to me. And he just kind of sat bolt upright and did a very similar thing, looked me right in the eye, and said, as the girl had done a couple of weeks previously, and he said, but I was listening to you. And I thought, yep, that's me told. And, you know, the kids have won again. They've got it all right, and I'm playing catch up. So because it had worked so well for him, it kind of then empowered me, or gave me the confidence to try with children in all sorts of situations. So the next time I speak to you, I'm going to describe some more of those occasions when it's been of help to another child. So thank you for listening to me again. I hope you've had a lovely bank holiday and you're enjoying all this warm weather, and I look forward to speaking to you again. Thank you very much.